The train wailed one last time before vanishing into the black desert, its echo swallowed by the wide silence of the plains. Lantern light flickered weakly at the lonely station. A tall man leaned against a wooden post, hat low, coat dusted with the ghost of the day's ride. His name was Silas Boone, a cowboy molded from sun and solitude. He had come for no reason other than habit. A man like him had few places to be. But on that cold night something was waiting for him that would change the shape of his life forever. Out of the shadows, two figures emerged, barefoot, trembling, their faces smudged with dust. They looked barely older than girls, yet their eyes carried the weight of whole histories. One of them spoke, her voice quivering like the flame inside his lantern. "Please, don't leave us alone," she said. The sound of it pierced him in a way that felt almost familiar. She was the elder, Ayanna, though he would not know her name until later. Beside her stood Naira, the younger sister, clutching a small bundle of beads tied in cloth. The wind rose around them, whispering through the dry grass like an old secret. Silas didn't ask what had happened. He could see enough, hunger in their faces, fear in the way their shoulders tensed at every sound. He gestured toward his wagon. "Come on," he said softly. "Ain't safe to be out here." His voice carried a warmth that surprised even him. Ayanna hesitated, studying him with eyes that seemed to measure truth the way water measures depth. Then she nodded, and they climbed onto the back of the wagon. The road into town was long and silent. The only sounds were the creak of the wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves against the dirt. Silas stole glances over his shoulder. Ayanna sat with her sister wrapped in her arms, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon. He wanted to ask who they were, what had driven them to the station at such an hour, but some instinct told him not to break the quiet. Instead, he let the sound of the wind fill the space between them. He didn't know why, but something about her presence, fragile and fierce all at once, stirred a part of him he'd thought long dead. By the time they reached his cabin, the moon had climbed high above the cottonwoods. The little house stood by a creek, its windows dim, its porch half swallowed by vines. Silas lit a lamp and pushed the door open. "It ain't much," he said, stepping aside. "But it's warm." Naira stepped inside first, touching the rough wooden walls as if testing if they were real. Ayanna followed, her movements deliberate, reverent. When her eyes met his, something in the air shifted. A silent understanding passed between two souls who didn't yet know each other's stories, only that they were both haunted by something that had left them hollow. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. Through the thin wall separating his small room from the one he'd given them, he heard Ayanna humming, a soft, wordless tune that sounded older than the land itself. The melody carried a sadness that twisted his chest, yet it soothed him all the same. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed not of the battles he'd fought or the graves he'd left behind, but of a river running clear under a sky full of stars. Morning brought the first murmurs of trouble. When Silas rode into town for supplies, the general store went silent. Men exchanged glances, women turned away. "You takin' in Indians now, Boone?" one of them asked, his tone halfway between mockery and disbelief. Silas said nothing. He paid for his flour, his salt, his coffee, and walked out without looking back. But their words followed him like dust, clinging, inescapable. When he returned home, he found Ayanna and Naira by the creek, stringing beads in the sunlight. Their laughter surprised him, light, musical, unburdened. "Thought I'd bring you some food," he said, setting down his sack. Ayanna looked up and smiled. "We have work," she said, lifting a bracelet made of turquoise and silver. "We will sell them in town." He almost told her not to. He wanted to protect her from the ugliness waiting there. But when he saw the determination in her eyes, that quiet pride, he swallowed his fear. "Then I'll build you a stall," he said. She tilted her head, studying him as though he were a puzzle. "Why would you do that for us?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because somebody should." They opened the stall near the saloon, their jewelry glinting under the sun. 4 days, no one stopped. People passed by without a glance, or worse, with laughter. Then a small boy bought a bracelet for a penny. Then a woman came back for 2 more. Slowly, like the thaw after winter, curiosity turned into trade. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, a rock shattered their display, scattering beads across the dust. Silas arrived moments later, rage simmering beneath his calm. Ayanna knelt to gather the beads, her hands steady. "Let them be," she said. "The earth remembers kindness longer than anger." He didn't understand how she could be so gentle in a world that had given her nothing but cruelty. That night, he sat by the fire outside his cabin, watching her sew under the glow of the oil lamp. Her fingers moved like a prayer, her face serene. He realized then that she didn't just survive, she transformed whatever touched her. And in that realization, something inside him shifted forever. Days turned to weeks. The rhythm of their lives found its own melody. Naira sang while she worked. Ayanna laughed more often now. Silas caught himself listening for her laughter even before he heard it. When he rode out at dawn, he thought of her smile. When he came back at dusk, he found her silhouette waiting by the creek, and it felt like coming home. One morning, Silas rode out into the hills, the wind tugging at his coat. He dismounted among a field of wildflowers, their colors painting the dry earth with unexpected life. He gathered them clumsily, filling his arms until the petals overflowed. When he returned, Ayanna was sitting on the porch, her hair loose, eyes half closed against the sun. "These are for you," he said. She looked at the flowers, puzzled. "Why?" He hesitated. Words felt too heavy, too clumsy. "Because you make the desert bloom again," he said finally. Ayanna stared at him for a long moment, the silence thick as honey. Then she took one flower and tucked it into his hatband. "Now we both wear the earth," she said. The air between them seemed to hum with something that didn't need a name. She turned back to her work, but he stood there for a long while, trying to steady his heartbeat. That peace didn't last. A few nights later, riders came, men from the saloon, faces shadowed, voices slurred with whiskey. "Boone," one shouted. "You're bringin' shame to this town. Send those women away." Silas stepped out onto the porch, unarmed but unflinching. The lantern light caught his jaw, his shoulders squared like a wall. "No," he said simply. The silence that followed was cold and brittle. One of the men spat in the dirt. "Then you'll be sorry." "Maybe," Silas said. "But I'd be more sorry if I didn't stand where I should." Ayanna appeared behind him then, her hand resting on the doorframe, her eyes steady. The men looked at her, and something in their posture faltered. There was dignity in her stillness, something they couldn't mock without feeling small. Eventually, one by one, they turned their horses and rode away. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Silas turned to her. "You shouldn't have come out," he murmured. She shook her head. "I had to see the man who stands like the mountains." Her smile was faint, but it undid him more completely than any fight could. The next morning, Silas began building a second cabin beside his own. Each plank he hammered carried the weight of a promise he hadn't spoken. When Ayanna asked what it was for, he wiped the sweat from his brow and said, "For the future, if you'll have one here." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, eyes soft with something unspoken, and he thought that maybe silence could be an answer, too. By the time spring returned, the cabin was finished. The air smelled of rain, and the creek ran high. Silas rode again to the meadow, and brought back a handful of wildflowers, the same kind as before. He found Ayanna by the water, her reflection shimmering beside her. "You once asked why I gave you flowers," he said. "I didn't know then. But I do now." He took a breath. "Because I love you, in the way the river loves the sky." Her eyes widened, and for a moment he thought he'd spoken too soon. But then she reached up, fingers tracing the edge of his jaw. "And what of my sister?" "She'll always have my care," he said. "But my heart belongs to you." Ayanna's hand lingered over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. Then let it be known, she whispered. That night, beneath the starlit sky, Silas and Ayanna stood before the townsfolk. No preacher, no altar, only the open air and the sound of the creek nearby. He placed the wildflowers in her hair, and she took his hand. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Naira began to clap, and one by one, the townspeople joined her. A slow, uncertain applause that turned into something real. Afterward, Silas led Ayanna to the new cabin. The lamp inside glowed with golden light. He took off his hat, suddenly shy. "I made something for you," he said, bringing out a piece of jewelry he'd fashioned himself, silver wound with turquoise, shaped like the rising sun. "For your hair," he said quietly. She loosened her dark hair, and let him place the ornament there. Then she lifted her face to his. "You are the first man who saw me," she said. He kissed her gently, not as possession, but as promise. The wind outside sighed through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers. In the old cabin next door, Naira watched the firelight flicker and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. For the first time since their long journey began, peace settled over her. Her sister was safe, her own heart no longer hollow. The world had made a small place for them, but it was enough. Time moved softly. Their jewelry became loved in town. Children smiled, women admired, even the men once cruel now nodded in respect. Each evening, the three sat by the fire, Silas carving small horses, Ayanna humming, Naira weaving, their lives blending with the song of the creek. Years later, Silas's beard had turned gray. He still rode the hills and always returned to Ayanna by the water. She would take his hand and whisper, "You saved us." He'd smile gently. "No, darlin', you saved me." And when dawn touched the creek, the wind still carried her song, soft, eternal, belonging. And maybe, if they listened closely enough, they'd understand the truth Silas Boone had lived and died by. Love doesn't thunder. It lingers. It waits. It builds cabins beside lonely hearts and turns exile into home. The world will always test the kind ones. But sometimes, against all odds, kindness wins. And when it does, the desert blooms.